Hey all, here is the video that goes along with the graphic organizer that I posted. As I said in the instructions, print out the graphic organizer, put your name at the top, follow along with the PowerPoint, handwrite, do not type, handwrite in everything as we go along. Once we finish, put your name on it, make sure your name's on it, and take a picture of it, scan it, whatever you need to do, and then post it to the assignment on Google Classrooms. Please let me know if you have questions. Due by 7 o'clock tonight, should be no problem. First battle on your graphic organizers is the Battle of Iwo Jima. As you can see here, Iwo Jima itself is an island really not close to anything. It is an uninhabited island. It's an ugly old volcano island, mainly volcanic ash. No real vegetation lives on the island at all. The only reason it is seen as, or the U.S. wants it at all, is because it's an air base from which planes can reach Japan. And not only that, damaged planes, if we go back here and look at the map again, damaged planes that are in route back to Pearl Harbor after attacking Tokyo, after attacking Japan, these planes can land at Iwo Jima if they can't make it all the way back to Pearl Harbor, to Hawaii. So, and here's two pictures and then a map. You can see Mount Suribachi there, the old volcano, and then you can see the terrain, which is just ugly volcanic ash, and then the map on the right with the two airfields that were really the only reason this island was valuable at all. 6,000 Marines die in the 31-day battle. 20,000 Japanese soldiers die. And you can see 99% of the Japanese soldiers in the battle are killed. Only 216 Japanese are captured or surrender. And this kind of tells you, again, that we talked about before, the Japanese just do not believe in surrendering. And that'll prove very important as we go forward in this. Oh, in red is where I'm going to put the why important, just to keep everything clear for you guys. Why is it important? Because now the U.S. does have that needed air base to bomb mainland Japan. This is the famous picture that comes out of the Battle of Iwo Jima. This actually takes place pretty early in the battle, day 7 of the battle. The U.S. soldiers take the Mount Suribachi, the old volcano, and well before the battle is over, they put the flag on top of Mount Suribachi. Actually, two of the U.S. Marines in this picture die later on in the battle and never actually make it off the battle. That picture now has been reproduced and is this statue at the U.S. Marine Corps Memorial in Arlington, Virginia, right across, you can see right across from Washington, D.C. Following the conclusion of the Battle of Iwo Jima in March of 45, the U.S. moves on to Okinawa in April of 45, which is a very different island. Okinawa is close to mainland Japan. It is inhabited by hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians, and it is therefore a very different battle than Iwo Jima. Okinawa is valuable to the U.S. because they are planning on an invasion of mainland Japan. And so the U.S. wants control of this island to use as a base to attack mainland Japan. It is an 82-day battle in April to June of 45. 12,000 U.S. troops die, 70,000 Japanese soldiers die, 100 to 150,000 Japanese civilians die. Yes, it's the deadliest battle in the Pacific for the Americans with 12,000 casualties. But from a perspective of the conclusion of the war, or working towards the conclusion of the war, probably the most important thing there is the number of civilians that die for the Japanese. The Japanese civilians have been told that the Americans soldiers are subhuman almost, monsters. They will cut off extremities of civilians, hands, feet, nose, ears. They will kill the children. They will rape the women. And they are told that you just can't surrender. It's better to die than to surrender the Americans. And so the civilians fight to the death. And you see pictures like this where U.S. soldiers are using flamethrowers against civilians in caves, because these civilians are running at the Americans with grenades, with anything they can, basically just committing suicide in order to try to kill these Americans. And the Americans kill hundreds of thousands of civilians, or 100 to 150,000 civilians die. And the lesson of this is, and the why important, is because of the Japanese refusal to surrender, both the civilians and the soldiers. The U.S. military estimates that if they are forced to invade mainland Japan, it may mean 1.5 million Allied casualties in the invasion. And this is where President Truman, who was taken over once President Roosevelt died in early 45, decides to use the atomic bomb. Moving on to the Manhattan Project, this is the famous letter from Einstein to FDR in August of 39, where he says it is conceivable that extremely powerful bombs of a new type may thus be constructed, talking about the development of the atomic bomb. It happens in many places in the U.S. One of those, interestingly enough, is underneath the University of Chicago's football stadium. The University of Chicago is one of the leading engineering universities in the country. But it was also in the 1930s was a member of the Big Ten, played Big Ten football. The president of the university in the 30s decided too much focus was on athletics. Excuse me, ended the university's athletic programs. And now they have this empty football stadium, empty locker rooms, empty everything. And it becomes the place where a lot of the testing happened, is underneath the football stadium at the University of Chicago. Obviously, the Manhattan Project was not just there at the Chicago Metallurgical Laboratories, but also all around the country. Probably the two most famous ones, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Los Alamos Research Laboratories in New Mexico. Eventually, it employs 130,000 people total. The development of atomic bombs like the one you see, which is ultimately used over Hiroshima, now, the completion of the Manhattan Project, the U.S. now has a way to win the war against Japan quickly. Why is it important? Because now the U.S. can avoid the invasion of mainland Japan. We talked about the number of casualties there. And not only that, Japan would surrender directly now to the U.S. and not also to the Soviet Union. Very importantly, because though the U.S. and the Soviet Union were allies during this war, they really didn't like each other. U.S. didn't trust the Soviet Union didn't trust the U.S., and the U.S. did not want Japan to surrender to the Soviet Union. Also, the U.S. wanted to be able to dictate what Japan would look like after the war. They were very afraid that if the Soviet Union was allowed to control it, they would try to make Japan communist. And so, yes, it saves the U.S. invasion of mainland Japan, but by forcing the surrender to the U.S. is able to dictate what post-war Japan will look like. The atomic bomb does end the war. This goes under the Hiroshima and Nagasaki part of your graphic organizer. In July of 45, Manhattan Project leads to the successful testing of the atomic bomb in the Arizona desert. A month later, Hiroshima, a major military center, is destroyed by the bomb. 100 that you saw in the video, the pictures, 100,000 people die pretty much in the first few days. 100,000 people, additional people in the years that come, die because of the radiation poisoning, and the city is wiped off the map. 3 days later, many argue before Japan would have even had a chance to surrender, a second bomb is dropped on Nagasaki, an industrial center in Japan. And ultimately, why is the atomic bomb important? Because Japan surrenders September of 45 to the United States, and I bolded that and underlined that for a reason, not to the Soviet Union, not to anyone else, but directly to the United States, which leads us to VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day, September 2nd, 1945. Japan agrees to the unconditional surrender to the United States aboard the USS Missouri. This was a ship that was was damaged in Pearl Harbor invasion, the Pearl Harbor attack. And so it's not a coincidence that the U.S. decides to use this ship. It's a picture of the Japanese leadership preparing to surrender and then signing the surrender papers, surrounded by the U.S. Military personnel. And very simply, VJ Day ends World War II. That's why VJ Day is important. Sets off celebrations all over the world, including this in Times Square, New York, and this very famous picture in Times Square, New York, of the U.S. Navy soldier and the U.S. Navy nurse. The woman in the photograph has been identified, but still the man in the photograph, we really don't know who that is. But a very famous photograph in the world, the war. All right, so that concludes our graphic organizer. You guys know what you have to do. Handwrite in all the notes, put your name at the top, take a picture of it, post it by 7 o'clock tonight. You have 10 hours, no problem. Post it by 7 o'clock tonight in Google Classrooms. Do not email it to me. Do not look for it anywhere in Turn It In, but post it directly into Google Classrooms. And we'll get started with the post-war world tomorrow. All right, have a good one, y'all. Let me know if you have questions. Bye.